camera.
And that's where you want me to look. Okay.
Yes. Hi, and welcome to Social Impact TV. I'm Anna Choi, and it is my pleasure to be with Chandra today. Yes. And we met actually at a social capitalism summit, and she is a mother, and she's very active there's many different words. So First Nations, Indian country, and what's your preferred?
I'm just in my native community.
In her native community. Great. So we actually just shared for a couple hours. I have learned so much, so I'm going to have to deduce down all of that. But I thought we could just start with, a story. So I was on the ferry with my 6-year-old son, Eli, and there was a native on the ferry playing his flute. And we just sat and listened. And then my son looks out the window and he goes, look at the Olympic Mountains. And he said, that's Canada. Did you know that's Canada? And the native looks at him and he goes, there is no Canada. And I was like, what? And we listened more and he's like, this is all one land. He goes, there's other people that came onto it and called it Canada. He's like, but with my people, he's like, there's no Canada. And I ended up talking with him, for the next hour or so. And anyway, so my son was like, he didn't know what to do with it. But one of the efforts that, Chandra is working on is being able to have that tribal history be included in our education system because it's so not. So there's no context for it. But, we were talking how, annoying it can be to have to recontextualize just how basic history even is, or what we label or how we term things. So if you can share, what are some other, you can share a little bit about your work background as well, but what are some things that are day to day, you deal with that have to be constantly recontextualized, or maybe even stereotypes about Native people? I would love to learn.
Sure. So I think probably in the news, most prominently and most recently, a couple of things come up. One is around tribal gaming. It's actually just around less than half, significantly less than half of tribes throughout the country even have tribal gaming. And those that do have it, and even a very small handful of them, actually make significant monies.
Through casinos.
Yeah,
okay.
through
not
casinos.
Through gaming, like wild gaming. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yes. Tribal gaming, otherwise known as casinos. It varies from state to state. For the most part, I explain that to people as think of it in terms of, and there is legal history behind this in terms of state lotteries. So where there is gaming, there is also a state lottery, and those are connected. And it's a form of tax because native tribes don't have the ability to generate significant tax revenue to provide services. The gaming enterprises are really the largest and the first time that we've had any ability to provide services to our people outside of monies that we might get through our treaty obligations with the federal government. It's the first time that we've had any excess dollars to put into basic services, health, education,
the federal
infrastructure.
Money does not do that.
So as many people might be aware, tribes are in constant state of litigation with the federal government to get them and the states and other municipalities to meet their treaty obligations. And so that's a never-ending, ongoing battle that we continue. But for us, the gaming enterprise, just as lotteries do in many states that provide funding for education primarily, sometimes other things. So I just tell people to think of it in terms of a tax. It's the only real source of tax that we have. It's a luxury tax. It's like the soda tax or anything like that. That's the primary way that
it goes back into the community.
Yes.
For all the excess things.
Yes, and the number of people that where there are excess funds, sort of like in the state of Alaska, how they have a revenue sharing. There is some amount of revenue sharing where there are small amounts of per capitas that there's a couple of tribes that always end up in the news that get big dollars from their what they call per capita payments, just like in Alaska with the revenue sharing that they do for their natural resources. But it's very small, but it's similar.
Can you explain the treaty just for those that don't know?
So like here in Seattle, we're talking about the treaty of the Point Elliott Treaty. And so those are the treaties are in fact the supreme law of the land for the United States of America. and they are the original governing document between the United States and the tribes. And
way before the Constitution.
Way before the Constitution, any of that. These are the laws that were first put in place here, and they are in full effect today. They have not gone away. The federal government is still responsible for abiding by the treaties. They're in constant violation of those treaties, which is why tribes are also constantly in litigation to hold them to those treaties. The other big myth, I think, is that, so not only are we not rich with casino dollars, other than finally putting in healthcare centers and sidewalks, daycare centers, community museums, library. Port Campbell has a really nice library that they put in thanks to casino dollars. But we're also, I think the other big myth is that we're not as impoverished as people would like to. We're impoverished from a Western sense in terms of not having access to capital. And that is a big chunk of where my work originated, was with the idea of trying to provide greater access to capital, as in money, resources, on reservations.
You were saying there's no financial services on a reservation.
I mean, like most rural communities, there are limited, where they are rural, and they're not always rural, but more often than not, there are limited, financial service deserts, if you will, where there are people do not have access to places to
get basic loans.
To get capital, capital to invest in their own projects, to invest in their families, in their home, in a business, or even to just have a depository account. So
like a basic checking account.
It's a huge, there's lots of good data around this about the extent to which people are either unbanked or underbanked. And it creates a good environment for payday lenders because they charge so much that they're able to recoup all the costs. And that's one of the biggest areas of my work has been specifically with First Nations Oweesta Corporation. That organization has created, through technical assistance and intermediary lending, has helped support and create Native community development financial institutions throughout the country on reservations. There's, I think, over 70 successful Native financial institutions.
So you fund that. So they raised $10 million, right?
So we've been doing this for a lot of years. Yeah. And for the first time, really importantly, one of the things that, in terms of sort of getting back to that point of that we're not as impoverished as we seem, we are finally getting enough ability in terms of finding a way to, within the U.S. capital system, to generate funds that then we can give back into our community. So our organization has put together a capital pool of $10 million, which is the largest amount that anyone has done for this kind of effort to give back into Indian country, into these loan funds that exist on reservations throughout the country. And there's a few that are not specifically reservation-based, but like, say, the state of Nebraska, where they work with Native people throughout the state of Nebraska, but mostly they're reservation-based. And those are the individuals who understand running those organizations that, in fact, we are not as impoverished as we appear, because, in fact, we have a tremendous amount of entrepreneurialism. We are the original entrepreneurs of this land, and we have been trading for thousands of years and been making things and working in markets for thousands of years, and that we are, in fact, worthy of investment and see ourselves as worthy of investment. So this is a really important effort that we have undertaken to get to this point of not just convincing institutional investors and other private investors through our track record of successfully lending to very low risk. That's the other thing that I like to explain.
And let me just clarify in case people might not get it. So your 10 million then funds things like CDFIs or what
loan funds. Yeah,
they give loans to the people who, like someone who wants to start a business. Now they're like an intermediary that can give money to
an entrepreneur or a person who is maybe wanting to fix up their house or maintain their house, needs a new septic system, there's a huge array,
and you can disperse it to those organizations or institutions that can then give it to the individuals,
and then they give
right?
it to the individuals.
So that's how that works. Okay.
And having that pool allows the risk to be dispersed amongst the investors that we have talked to and who have seen us do this work now for 10 plus years, and seen how that we are good risk. I think one of the things that was interesting to me about one of the misperceptions when I went into banking at first was the idea that tribes were high risk. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it,
like not going to pay their loans back.
Like not going to pay the loans back. But we've been here for tens of thousands of years. We're not going anywhere. Nobody's going anywhere. Nobody's going to take off with your, we're communities, we're tribes. We have treaties. Our status is one that is similar to states in terms of our relationship with the federal government. So these are nations. And the default rate is extremely low in doing these investments into Indian country. And then for those different organizations within their community, the people that know their community, to invest back into their own individual entrepreneurs. So finally getting some capital, some sizable capital into these communities to start regrowing what we have been rich with all along, which is our own indigenous knowledge and our own indigenous practices,
which has really been reaching like a tipping point, right? Like coming back and like being a presence, to be a resource, not a handout, but stuff. There's a phrase I'm forgetting it right now.
I think that's
not a handout, but a hand up, or not even. You're actually the ones that can be providing the resources to all the cities. I mean, we're dealing with gun violence right now in the country, and it's like we're talking on the regulatory level or bullying level, which is so, from a human perspective, an immature conversation as opposed to the deep source of it, right? Like in indigenous culture, it's like there's a coming of age. So what if that could be there instead of all the adolescent angst that one anticipates,
right?
That matures one. That wouldn't even be a conversation, right? But nobody's talking about that as a solution, even though they have 10,000 years of knowledge that can be shared and learned from. Like, how to deal with integration and different ideas, and I mean, I just find
I think that it's a really important. We have been clawing our way back and are kind of reaching a point where we've managed to use the language of capitalism and the relationship. One of those myths that should always be broken is the idea that we get handouts, and Native people and tribal governments do not in any way, shape, or form get handouts. What they get are a form of support, which are payments in trade for land that was taken for us. That's the basis of the treaties. So there's that relationship is all written into the treaties. So those are the governing documents. If anybody has questions about,
it's like not a loan, but they're in debt and they're paying
the federal
back.
Government is in debt to the tribes.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's all. It's like the baseline,
and continues to try not to pay their debt by not actually
providing.
They're
the ones on high risk.
That a lot of people would agree with that right now. But I think that the other thing that's really critical about that is that that there is a deep connection to a sense of knowledge that in fact has really important modern applications in everything from medicine to science to how we interact with one another to how we interact with people who come to our lands.
Yes.
With all of the non-natives as the original immigrants, and how we approach that. We have slowly over a period of hundreds of years of colonization are now in a process of decolonizing our own thinking and taking back our own indigenous knowledge and intelligence and holding it up as a beacon, I hope, in terms of how markets work, how you trade with people, how you assess value. And that's why I say that we're not impoverished, because in fact we have the most valuable resource on this land, which is the knowledge of how to live here sustainably on this land, because we have done it for thousands of years. And that knowledge has not disappeared. We have lost pieces of it, but we're resilient and have managed to get ourselves, we have so many good, we have unemployment. We still have high rates of unemployment, but unemployment is decreasing. We have high rates of addiction, but addiction is being, one of the tribal council people I spoke with recently said that he didn't see our addiction levels or our issues that any community is dealing with, whether it's the opioid crisis or meth addiction, that all communities are struggling with right now. He didn't see that as a weakness, but an opportunity to, that we've gotten our hands dirty and to wash them and move on and to grow out of that.
And you can show the way for others now,
and
just
to show
newly dealing with it.
Right. And as many communities of color are aware, these are things that have affected our community for a long, long, long time because of oppression. And now that it's impacted mainstream, what I refer to as colonial America, the sons and daughters of colonialism, it's suddenly become very important. And there are, but the conversation hasn't really reached that point of, no, I think one of the things that is most difficult to people in addressing these things is that it is based in a fundamental misunderstanding about about somebody's presence here, right? We're only, for any given family, you're only a few generations really on this land, and this land was colonized with a sense of entitlement, really, that this was somebody's for the taking. And we seem to have, there seems to be some recognition of that's not, that you don't do that. You don't just take somebody's land. But it did happen, and we haven't taught that in American history. And that's one thing that is so great about Washington State and Montana are the two states that have mandated the teaching of tribal history as part of.
I did not get that when I grew up in Georgia. No.
And I would add to that, the history, Black history. That's why we have Black History Month, and it shouldn't just be a month. It should be all the time. It should be Native history all the time. It should be Chinese immigrant history.
Yeah,
it should be Japanese immigrant history. Anybody who's played a part in what is now America, not knowing where your family fits and not knowing your history. It's sort of this. One of the things that we talked about was this notion that you can take all this excess money that's been accumulated at kind of the upper levels of American society, the haves, at this point, and who are then wanting to turn around and do good works with that. But they're trying to do good works with that and put it back into bad systems that aren't based on the acknowledgement of the fact that they were built on a taking, that they were built on colonization. And that's a hard thing for somebody to accept if that's where their money came from. But I would ask them to not so much personalize that, but to look at that as, okay, I need to actually slow down rather than speed up or try to accelerate my way into this. Or we've got to, do more green energy. We've got to do more of this.
There's all this acceleration and fast pace, with business, right? Yeah.
But instead to say, okay, what are our values that would allow us to kind of slow down and look deeper into the very, very short time that it's nice, because you don't actually have to go that deep. It's only a short time that this country has even existed. And what is anybody's given, place in that history? So every American should know their place in that history, whether they're Native or they're European immigrant or they're Chinese immigrant or they're Mexican, quote unquote, immigrant, although I do tend to argue that because a lot of Mexican people are very much indigenous, that and if you look at the history of the United States and what happened, they have quite a bit more right to be here than many of our European neighbors, but certainly as much, but that there is a
over time. Yeah, no, just I remember, it's like that when you look at the whole time continuum and how short this country's been here and how long humanity's been here, 10,000 years to 200 years, right? It's like they're little toddlers and babies,
right?
And they've created this little this capitalistic system that's very new. That needs work. It's broken. It doesn't always work.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it. Nothing to fix or change. But then that we have a system that's been around for 10,000 years, which is a lot longer, that we can learn from and integrate and morph. And so rather than having it be, you know, I think with natives, it's like, oh, we got to help them, or, you know, I think to a certain degree, generally, people know that there's been oppression. They don't know to what degree, maybe, but that there has been. It's more like, no, they are actually the resource of 10,000 years that we can really learn from and incorporate into modern society. So there's so many cool things. So how can people engage, like, into learning more and into, like you were saying, how in schools now they're required to teach tribal history, but there's no funding. So we'll put a link below here that shows where you can get, it's called Time Immemorial, right?
Since Time Immemorial.
Yep.
That's the curriculum that is used throughout Washington State in all
it is.
K through 12.
Great. Okay, great.
It's just that there's no funding to train teachers in it. There's no funding to create assessments. There's no funding for materials. So it's a long way to go before it's really actionable in the schools and being able to hold the schools accountable to teaching it. But we're hoping that, unlike current adults, that a new generation will emerge that has a much greater sense of the full history.
Yes.
Of, and here, at least in this case, this Washington state, and who was here first, and what did they bring to the table in terms of, because they're still here.
Yes.
And they're thriving all around us,
Yes.
And bringing great things to the table, and are still the keepers of the most important knowledge that we have access to in terms of our ability to continue to live in a good, sustainable way on this planet and be healthy and happy and have nice things. You know, I think that's another myth that I would like to bust, is that, you know, as Native people, we're not afraid to you know, drop a dime, and we're extremely generous people. We have an incredible gifting society based, you know, in different versions depending on your tribe, but there's a consistent theme of reciprocity and giving, and that is, and we love our bling, you know. We our markets,
planet, and profit, right?
Yeah, we feel everybody likes to buy and sell and trade and give.
The entrepreneurial spirit, yes.
The entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well. I think one thing that I like to point out to people who are new to our community or new to the idea of investing in our community, or want to kind of learn the ways that we think about the world and how, you know, no, we don't have 25-minute meetings.
I know, especially not slowing down. I love that. She was like 25 minutes. She's like, for a normal person, that'd be like, oh, yeah, you set up 25-minute meetings. She's like, but for my people, that's like, that makes no
And
sense.
every business person knows about relationship building, right? Everyone knows that that's core. It's just that how much value is that? You know, it's sort of like looking at the value systems and trying to flip them a little bit and stretching them out to look from a much more long-term perspective, and looking at the value of a given relationship. And how long does it take to build a relationship? Well, it takes longer than 25 minutes, and not to mention time to, so there was another myth that I was going to break, though, which had to do with, now I've forgotten what it is, so that's okay.
That's okay. There's many.
But in terms of other resources, the Indian Land Tenure Foundation has a great curriculum as well. It's not just for Washington State. So if somebody's outside of Washington State and they want to access I think it's a K5 or K8 curriculum, that's accessible through the Indian Land Tenure Foundation.
Give me the link, and I'll be sure to put that link at the bottom here. So.
And then the National Museum of the American Indian, they are doing, in fact, they have an exciting webinar coming up, or I think they're going to stream an event that has to do with mascot issues, and they're doing it in concert with the National Museum of the National African American History Museum. So they're doing that in concert together. So it's, you know, kind of an exciting time. It's a really depressing time at times, but for us in Indian country, and I think with other communities that have been left out of the
narrative,
narrative and the story, that we're trying to reclaim that. And there are some really good resources. And that was the other thing, is I was going to say, that was my last little bit of it's not so much a myth busting, but in terms of the giving and the sense of reciprocity, that a fisher, for example, that goes out and gets a big catch that then he's going to take to market, before he takes that to market and sells his fish and makes his money, he gives fish to his community first.
Wow.
From that first.
What
you know, mainstream American society tends to do is prioritize the greed and the money making, and it doesn't have to be perceived as greed, but the reason that I see it that way is because it doesn't start with the gift. It doesn't start with
that profit,
with the gratitude and the opportunity.
No.
For the opportunity to do that work and to have that, to access that resource. There has to be that. I mean, I was even taught by my mother when I was little that, you know, when she skinned her first deer, you know, she said her prayers of gratitude and thanked that animal for giving its life so that she could eat, which is why none of us are vegetarians, but because we believe in the circle of life. Yeah, my ancestors ate buffalo and other things that were very, very meaty, but it is always about that, showing the gratitude and giving first before you accumulate.
Which is fascinating because even inside the triple bottom line of people, planet, profit, it's still about these measurements and these goals and versus the spirit or the energy of integrating all of those aspects in each of your actions that you're taking in the process, right? Versus the outcomes of the measurements and the impact. Like there's such a
and I like outcomes, and I mean I do.
Not to say that that's bad, right? But
well, no, I think that you can't. I'm really comfortable in an environment. Part of why I like this work is I like being able to measure things, and then I like being able to throw it out when you're like. And anybody who has done any kind of investing knows how true that is. Any kind of like regular American capitalistic investing. Sometimes you get all you get all the math done, and it looks good on paper, and then at the end of the day, it's a disaster, and you were wrong. You know, and that just goes to the fact that there's always some very unquantifiable piece of it. And I think that where we have gone wrong is with the idea that sometimes we're measuring the wrong things and finding ways to value and measure things that are going to be as equally, I mean, like relationships, for example, in 25-minute meetings, you've got to, there's math and then there's math, and you can always find ways to quantify things that you didn't think were quantifiable, and you can include them in your overall equation, and you can stop measuring things that have ceased to ever bear any fruit in terms of your ability to say just have a healthy community. If you have healthy people, like investing in healthcare probably seems, as this nation has demonstrated, like something that for some reason we're not supposed to do. But if we have a healthy populace, what kind of beneficial impact does that have?
Yes.
I mean, it's just, I don't understand why that's not.
We're just worried on fixing something broken versus creating.
Right. Making sure there's the gift there, there's the health first, that there's, okay, well, we'll take care of you, and then you do your work.
Right.
And then you contribute.
Way more innovation, way more productivity, way more results, actually. Yeah.
And that there's the expectation that that's, we're a community and we take care of each other, but then we also have very high expectations for work ethic. And that's another value that we definitely have. And when you have high levels of unemployment, people believe that that's because people don't want to work, and that's not true. There are other factors that play into that. So yeah, we have a lot that we would like to share with the rest of us.
Isn't this so fascinating? I could talk for hours. We already just did, but thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you being here and sharing with us and providing your perspective. It's
Absolutely.
been a pleasure. So be sure that'll be a wrap, but we'll put all those different links that you can get involved, that you can learn more, that you can start to think from more a Native perspective and see how that can really contribute to whatever you're dealing with in modern society on all levels. So with that, thank you so much, Chandra.
You're very welcome.
Okay. All right, to be here. All right, bye.